The year was 2347, and the universe had grown much smaller than anyone on old Earth could have imagined. Humanity had spread across the stars, building stations and colonies on distant worlds. They had met dozens of alien species, some friendly and some not so friendly. After many years of hard work and careful diplomacy, humans had finally earned a place at the Great Galactic Assembly, where all the important species gathered to make decisions about the future of the cosmos. Katie Morgan had dreamed of the stars since she was a little girl growing up in a small town in Nebraska. She used to lie in the grass behind her house and watch the night sky, wondering what was out there. Now, at 29 years old, she lived among those very stars. She worked as a hospitality coordinator on the Terran Interstellar Station, a massive structure that floated in the darkness of space like a city made of metal and light. Her job was not exciting. She greeted visitors, helped them find their quarters, and made sure they had everything they needed during their stay. She dealt with complaints about the food, questions about the facilities, and the occasional lost piece of luggage. It was not the adventure she had dreamed of as a child, but it was honest work. And it let her live among the stars. On that particular evening, everything changed. A massive ion storm had rolled through the sector. The kind of storm that disrupted communications and made space travel dangerous. Ships were grounded, and the station was running on backup power. Most of the staff had retreated to their quarters, waiting for the storm to pass. Katie had been working late, finishing up some paperwork, when she decided to take a walk through the quieter sections of the station. Docking. Bay 7 was usually busy with cargo ships and transport vessels. But tonight it was empty and dark, lit only by the emergency lights that cast long shadows across the floor. Katie walked through the bay, enjoying the silence, when she heard something that made her stop. It was a sound like breathing, but heavier and rougher, like someone struggling for air. It came from the maintenance corridor that ran along the edge of the bay. Katie knew she should call security. The protocols were clear about unknown sounds in restricted areas. But something made her hesitate. The breathing sounded pained, desperate. She followed the sound. The maintenance corridor was narrow and filled with pipes and cables. Katie had to squeeze past equipment to move forward. The breathing grew louder as she went deeper into the corridor. Then she saw him. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall even though he was hunched over on the ground. His body was covered in dark green scales that shimmered even in the dim light. 2 great wings lay folded against his back, torn and bleeding. His face was long and angular, with eyes that glowed like golden fire. He was a Dracovian, one of the ancient dragon-like species that humans had heard stories about, but rarely seen in person. The Dracovians were proud and powerful. They had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. They kept to themselves, rarely speaking to younger species, and they were known for their strict code of honor. To see one wounded and hiding in a maintenance corridor was shocking. The Dracovian looked up at Katie, and she saw fear in those golden eyes. Not fear of her, but fear of being seen like this, weak and helpless. "Please," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Please do not report me." Katie stood frozen for a moment. Every rule she had learned told her to call security immediately. An unregistered alien on the station was a serious matter. But the pain in his voice, the desperation in his eyes, made her hesitate. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. The Dracovian shifted, wincing as he moved his injured wings. "My ship," he said. "The storm destroyed it. I barely made it to this station alive. I crawled through an old service hatch." He paused, his breathing heavy. "My name is Varn. I am a merchant. A simple trader." Katie looked at his wounds. The scales on his side were cracked and bleeding. One of his wings was bent at an unnatural angle. He needed medical attention, but she understood why he did not want to go to the station's medical bay. She had heard stories about Dracovian culture. They valued strength above all else. A Dracovian who showed weakness before other species would be considered disgraced among his own kind. "You need help," Katie said. Varn shook his great head. "I cannot accept help. Not from—" He stopped himself, but Katie understood what he meant. Not from a human. Not from a species the Dracovians considered young and unimportant. But Katie had never been good at following rules that did not make sense to her. She looked at this wounded creature, this proud being who had been brought low by a storm, and she made a decision. "I do not care about your rules," she said firmly. "And I do not care about mine either. You are hurt, and I am going to help you. You can complain about it later." Something flickered in Varn's golden eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been gratitude. He did not argue. Getting him to her quarters was not easy. Varn was heavy, and every step seemed to cause him pain. Katie had to guide him through back corridors and service passages, avoiding the few crew members who were still moving about the station. The ion storm helped in a way, since most of the security systems were offline and people were staying in their rooms. Her quarters were small, just a single room with a bed, a small kitchen area, and a tiny bathroom. But it was private, and that was what mattered. She helped Varn settle onto the floor, since he was far too large for any of her furniture. "This is foolish," Varn said as Katie gathered her small collection of medical supplies. "You could lose your position for this. You could be punished." Katie looked at him and smiled. "Maybe," she said. "But my grandmother always told me that a person's true character is shown by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. You cannot do anything for me, Varn. You are just someone who needs help. And I am someone who can give it." She began cleaning his wounds, working carefully around his scales. The Dracovian watched her with those glowing eyes, and for the first time since she found him, he seemed to relax. Outside, the iron storm continued to rage. Inside the small quarters, a human woman and a dragon from the stars sat together in silence, and something important began to grow between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would change everything. The ion storm showed no signs of stopping. For 3 days, it wrapped around the station like an angry beast, cutting off communications and keeping everyone trapped inside. Katie had called in sick to work, claiming she had caught a stomach illness. Her supervisor had not questioned it. Half the staff was hiding in their quarters anyway, nervous about the storm. During those 3 days, Katie learned more about the universe than she had in her entire life. Varn was a difficult patient at first. He refused to eat the food she offered him, saying it was beneath his dignity to share meals with a human. He complained about the size of her quarters, the hardness of the floor, and the strange smells that humans apparently carried with them everywhere. Katie ignored his complaints and continued treating his wounds. By the second day, something began to change. Katie was cleaning the deep gash on his wing when Varn suddenly spoke. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "You gain nothing from helping me. Your people would punish you if they found out. Yet, you continue. I do not understand." Katie did not look up from her work. "Do I need a reason to help someone who is hurt?" Varn was quiet for a long moment. "Among my people, every action must have purpose. We do nothing without expecting something in return. Help is given only to those who can repay it, or to those who are worthy of it." "That sounds lonely," Katie said. The words seemed to strike Varn like a physical blow. He turned his great head away from her, staring at the wall. "We are the Dracovians," he said quietly. "We have ruled our corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. We do not need companionship. We do not need friends." Katie finished wrapping his wing and sat back. "Everyone needs friends, Vaughn, even dragons." That night, Varn finally accepted the food she offered. They sat together in her small quarters, sharing a simple meal of protein bars and recycled water. It was not much, but Varn ate without complaint. And then, slowly, he began to talk. He told her about the Dracovian homeworld, a planet of vast mountains and deep valleys where his people had first learned to fly. He spoke of their ancient wars, the enemies they had defeated, and the empire they had built among the stars. His voice was filled with pride, but Katie heard something else underneath. She heard loneliness. "Your people sound very strong," she said when he finished. "We are strong," Varn agreed. "But strength has a cost. We have conquered much, but we have lost much as well. We do not trust easily. We do not love easily. We have forgotten how to be soft." Katie smiled at that. "Being soft is not a weakness," she said. "On Earth, we nearly destroyed ourselves with our strength. We built weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we almost used them. It was only when we learned to be soft, to care for each other instead of fighting each other, that we survived." Varn listened with great interest. He asked her many questions about Earth, about human history and human culture. He wanted to know about families, about how humans raised their children and cared for their elderly. He seemed fascinated by the concept of love, of giving yourself to another person without expecting anything in return. "This is strange to me," he admitted. "Among Dracovians, we mate for political advantage. We form alliances, not bonds. The idea of loving someone simply because you choose to love them is," he struggled to find the right word, "beautiful?" Katie suggested. Varn looked at her with those glowing golden eyes. "Yes," he said slowly. "Beautiful." On the third day, Katie noticed that Varn's questions had become more specific. He wanted to know how humans treated strangers, how they behaved when no one was watching, what they valued most in their society. The questions seemed odd for a simple merchant, and Katie found herself growing suspicious. "You ask a lot of questions for a trader," she said as she changed the bandage on his side. Varn went very still. "I am curious by nature," he said carefully. "My work takes me to many places. I like to learn about different species." Katie did not push further, but she filed the information away in her mind. There was something Varn was not telling her. His vocabulary was too refined, his manner too noble for a common merchant. He spoke like someone who was used to being obeyed, not someone who haggled over cargo prices. But in the end, it did not matter. Whatever secrets Varn was keeping, he was still a wounded creature who needed her help. Katie had made her choice, and she would stand by it. That evening, as they shared another meal, Varn said something that surprised her. "I was wrong about your species," he said quietly. "I came here believing that humans were like all the other young races. Selfish, greedy, concerned only with their own advancement." He paused, looking at Katie with an expression she could not read. "You have shown me something different." Katie felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am just one person," she said. "I cannot speak for all of humanity." "Perhaps," Varn agreed. "But one person can be enough. One person can change everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars through the small window of Katie's quarters. The storm was finally beginning to weaken. Soon, the station would return to normal operations, and Varn would have to leave. Neither of them spoke about what would happen then. Late that night, as Katie was preparing to sleep, she heard voices in the corridor outside her quarters. Heavy footsteps, official sounding. Her heart began to race. "Security sweep," a voice called out. "Open your doors for inspection." Katie looked at Varn, and Varn looked at her. They both knew what this meant. Someone had noticed her strange behavior. Someone had asked questions. And now security was coming to find answers. There was nowhere for Varn to hide. He was too large, too obvious. Katie could feel her entire world beginning to crumble around her, but she did not regret her choice. Looking at Vaughn, at the wounds she had treated, and the friendship they had built, she knew she would make the same decision again. Some things were more important than rules. Some things were more important than careers, Doug. The door chime sounded, harsh and demanding. Katie took a deep breath and went to answer it. The security officers did not wait for Katie to fully open the door. They pushed inside the moment they saw the gap, their weapons raised and ready. There were 5 of them, all wearing the dark uniforms of station security, all looking very serious and very angry. When they saw Varn, they froze. A Dracovian. An actual Dracovian, sitting on the floor of a junior employee's quarters, his wounds wrapped in medical bandages. The lead officer, a large man with a scar across his cheek, stared at the scene with his mouth hanging open. What in the stars is going on here? He demanded. Katie stepped forward, placing herself between the officers and Varn. She knew it was a foolish gesture. She was small and unarmed, and Varn was a massive alien who could probably defend himself even while injured. But something in her refused to step aside. He was hurt, she said simply. I helped him. The lead officer looked at her like she had lost her mind. Do you have any idea what you have done? Harboring an unregistered alien? Providing medical care without authorization? This is a Dracovian, for Star's sake. Do you know how important they are to our diplomatic efforts? Katie felt her heart sink. She had known there would be consequences, but hearing them spoken aloud made everything feel more real, more final. Varn tried to stand, his wings spreading slightly despite his injuries. This woman did nothing wrong, he said, his voice deep and commanding. I asked for her help. She gave it freely. The fault is mine. But the security officers were not interested in his explanations. They called for backup, and within minutes, Katie's tiny quarters were filled with people. Medical teams arrived to examine Varn. Officials arrived to document the scene. And finally, Station Director Gregory Palmer arrived to take control of the situation. Palmer was a thin man with cold eyes and a permanent frown. He had run the Terran Interstellar Station for 15 years, and he was known for his strict adherence to protocol. He looked at Katie with open disgust. Do you understand what you have done? He asked, his voice tight with anger. We have spent decades trying to earn the respect of the Dracovians. They are one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Their support could secure humanity's future among the stars. And you decided to hide one in your quarters like some kind of pet? Katie felt anger rising in her chest. He is not a pet, she said firmly. He is a person who was hurt and needed help. I gave that help. I would do it again. Palmer's face turned red. You would do it again? You would throw away everything humanity has worked for because of some misguided sense of compassion? I would throw away everything, Katie replied, before I would turn my back on someone in need. That is what being human means. At least, that is what it should mean. The room went silent. Everyone stared at Katie, this small woman who dared to talk back to the station director. Even Vaughn seemed surprised by her words. Palmer recovered quickly. His expression hardened into something cold and final. You are finished here, he said. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You have 48 hours to collect your belongings and leave the station. If you are not gone by then, I will have security remove you. Katie had expected this. She had known from the moment she decided to help Varn that this might happen. But knowing something and experiencing it were two different things. She felt the weight of those words settling on her shoulders like a heavy stone. Her career was over. Her dreams of working among the stars were gone. Everything she had built over the past 5 years had been destroyed in a single moment. And yet, looking at Varn, she could not bring herself to regret it. The next few hours passed in a blur. Varn was taken to a secure holding area while the Dracovian embassy was contacted. Katie was escorted to a waiting room where she sat alone, watching through a window as officials ran back and forth, handling the diplomatic crisis she had apparently caused. Late that night, she was allowed to return to her quarters to begin packing. The room felt different now, emptier somehow, even though nothing had physically changed. She folded her clothes and packed her few personal belongings, wondering where she would go next. She had no family waiting for her on Earth. Her parents had died years ago, and she had no siblings. The station had been her home, and now she was being cast out of it. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find a young security officer standing outside, looking uncomfortable. "The Dracovian wants to see you," he said, before he is transferred to his people. Katie followed the officer through the station's corridors to the holding area. It was a large room with transparent walls, designed to hold alien visitors who might pose a security risk. Vaughn sat inside, his great body barely fitting in the space. His wings had been properly treated by the medical team, and he looked much healthier than when she had first found him. "They are letting me go," Vaughn said as Katie approached the transparent wall. "My people have arranged for my release." Katie nodded. "I am glad," she said. "You should be with your own kind." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. Then he moved closer to the wall, his golden eyes meeting hers. "What you did for me," he said slowly, "I will not forget. Among my people, such a debt cannot be ignored." Katie shook her head. "I did not do it for a debt. I did it because it was right." Vaughn placed one clawed hand against the transparent wall. It was a gesture Katie did not fully understand, but it felt important. Sacred somehow. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly why I will not forget." They stood like that for a long moment. The dragon and the human, separated by a wall of glass, but connected by something stronger. Then the guards came to escort Katie away, and she watched as Vaughn was led in the opposite direction. She never expected to see him again. That night, Katie sat in her half-empty quarters and cried. She cried for her lost career, for her uncertain future, for the dreams that had slipped through her fingers like sand. But underneath the grief, there was something else. A quiet warmth that refused to fade. She had done the right thing. She had helped someone who needed help. And no matter what happened next, no one could take that away from her. 2 weeks had passed since Katie left the Terran Interstellar Station. 2 weeks of trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered in a single night. She had returned to human-controlled space and found work at a small cargo depot on Mars, hauling freight for credits so low they barely covered her food and housing. The depot was nothing like the gleaming corridors of the station. It was dirty and loud, filled with the roar of engines and the shouts of workers. Katie spent her days moving heavy crates from one place to another, her muscles aching and her back sore. At night, she returned to her tiny rented room and collapsed onto a thin mattress, too tired to think about anything. The other workers did not know her story. They saw a young woman who worked hard and kept to herself, and they did not ask questions. Katie preferred it that way. She did not want to talk about what had happened. She did not want to explain why a promising career had suddenly ended. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about Vaughn. She wondered where he was, whether his wounds had fully healed, whether he ever thought about the human woman who had helped him. But she pushed those thoughts away. That chapter of her life was closed. She needed to focus on surviving the present. Then, on a gray morning when the Martian dust storms made the sky look like rust, everything changed again. The alarm came first. A piercing wail that cut through the usual noise of the depot and made everyone stop what they were doing. Katie looked up from the crate. She was moving to see workers pointing at the sky. Something was descending through the clouds. Something large and golden. It was a Dracovian diplomatic vessel, Katie felt her heart stop. Dracovian ships never came to Mars. The ancient species had no interest in human colonies. They dealt only with the highest levels of human government, and even then, only rarely. For one of their vessels to land at a cargo depot was unthinkable. Workers gathered at the edge of the landing zone, whispering nervously among themselves. Local officials came running, their faces pale with confusion and fear. No one knew what was happening. No one knew why the Dracovians had come. The ship settled onto the landing pad with a deep rumble that Katie felt in her bones. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the light. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a ramp extended from the belly of the ship, and figures began to emerge. First came the guards. Dracovian warriors in gleaming armor, each one carrying weapons that hummed with energy. They formed two lines on either side of the ramp, creating a corridor of scales and steel. Then came attendants in flowing robes, their movements graceful and precise. And then he appeared. Katie did not recognize him at first. He was different from the wounded creature she had found in that maintenance corridor. His scales shone like polished emeralds in the Martian light. His wings spread wide and proud, fully healed and magnificent. He wore ceremonial robes of gold and silver, decorated with symbols that spoke of ancient power and authority. But then she saw his eyes. Those golden eyes that glowed like fire. And she knew. Varn. The Dracovian walked down the ramp with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship. Local officials bowed deeply, their faces pressed nearly to the ground. Everyone knew they were in the presence of something important, even if they did not yet understand what. Varn stopped in the center of the landing zone and raised his voice. It carried across the entire depot, deep and resonant, silencing every whisper and every movement. "I am Varnaxis the Elder," he announced, Chief Diplomat of the Dracovian Empire, Advisor to the High Council, Voice of my people among the stars. Katie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Varn was not a merchant. He had never been a merchant. He was one of the most powerful Dracovians in existence, a figure so important that his name was spoken with reverence throughout the galaxy, and she had bandaged his wounds with supplies from her tiny medical kit. Varnaxis continued speaking, his eyes scanning the crowd. "For centuries, my people have watched the younger species. We have studied them in secret, judging their worth before deciding whether to offer our friendship. Most have failed our tests. They have shown greed, cruelty, and selfishness when they believed no one important was watching." He paused, and his gaze finally found Katie in the crowd. She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. "But one human showed me something different," Varnaxis said. "When I was wounded and helpless, disguised as a common merchant, she could have turned me away. She could have reported me to the authorities and earned praise for following the rules. Instead, she risked everything she had worked for, everything she had built, to help a stranger she believed could never repay her." The crowd turned to look at Katie. She felt 100 eyes upon her, felt the weight of their stares pressing down on her shoulders. "Her name is Katie Morgan," Varnaxis announced, "and she is the reason I stand before you today." He walked toward her, the crowd parting to let him pass. Each step brought him closer until he stood directly before her, towering over her small human form. Up close, she could see the same kindness in his eyes that she had glimpsed during those 3 days in her quarters. The same gratitude. "You asked for nothing," he said, his voice now soft enough that only she could hear. "You expected nothing. You simply helped because helping was right." Katie found her voice, though it trembled. "You lied to me," she said. "You were never a merchant." Varnaxis bowed his great head. "I did what I had to do. My people needed to see humanity's true nature, not the performance they put on for diplomats. I had to become no one important to find someone truly good. He straightened and spoke loudly again so everyone could hear. Among the Dracovians, honor is everything. And Katie Morgan has more honor than any being I have ever met. She proved that humanity is worthy of our respect, our friendship, and our alliance. Katie felt tears burning in her eyes. Everything she had lost, everything she had sacrificed, suddenly had meaning. Her career had ended because she helped a stranger, and that stranger had turned out to be the key to humanity's future, and he had come back for her. The news spread across human space like wildfire. Within hours of Varnax's arrival on Mars, every news channel, every communication network, every corner of humanity's domain was talking about the same thing. A woman named Katie Morgan had helped a disguised Dracovian diplomat, lost her job for it, and somehow changed the course of history. Katie watched it all unfold with a sense of disbelief. She had gone from hauling cargo in a dusty depot to standing at the center of the greatest diplomatic event in human history. Camera drones followed her everywhere. Reporters shouted questions at her from every direction. Politicians who had never heard her name before suddenly wanted to shake her hand. The Terran government moved quickly to control the situation. Station director Gregory Palmer was quietly removed from his position. His decision to fire Katie now seen as a terrible mistake that nearly cost humanity the alliance of a lifetime. He was replaced by someone younger, someone who understood that rules without compassion were worthless. Katie received a formal apology from the highest levels of human government. They offered her money, titles, positions of power. They promised to restore everything she had lost and more. But Katie did not care about any of that. She had never done what she did for rewards. She had done it because it was right. Varnaxis stayed on Mars for 3 days, meeting with human leaders and explaining what would come next. The Dracovian Empire had decided to support humanity's bid for full membership in the Galactic Assembly. This was not a small thing. The Assembly had strict rules about which species could join, and the Dracovian support carried enormous weight. With their backing, humanity's acceptance was almost guaranteed. On the second day, Varnaxis asked to speak with Katie alone. They met in a small garden that had been built inside the Mars colony, one of the few green spaces on the red planet. Trees and flowers grew in carefully controlled conditions. A tiny piece of Earth transplanted to an alien world. Katie found Varnaxis sitting by a small pond, his massive form looking strangely peaceful among the plants. He looked up as she approached and gestured for her to sit beside him. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "without all the cameras and officials watching." Katie sat down on the grass, which felt strange and familiar at the same time. "You already thanked me, publicly, in front of thousands of people." Varnaxis made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That was politics. This is personal." He turned to look at her, his golden eyes warm. "I have lived for many centuries, Katie Morgan. I have met kings and generals, emperors and conquerors. I have seen the best and worst that the galaxy has to offer. But I have never met anyone quite like you." Katie felt her cheeks grow warm. "I am nothing special. I am just a person who did what any decent person would do." "That is exactly what makes you special," Varnaxis replied. "You believe that helping others is normal, expected, ordinary. Among my people, such generosity is rare. Among most species, it is even rarer. You have shown me that humanity has something precious, something worth protecting." They sat in silence for a while, watching the artificial sunlight filter through the leaves above them. Katie thought about everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. Her life would never be the same. But looking at Varnaxis, at this ancient being who had become her friend, she realized she did not want it to be the same. "What happens now?" she asked. Varnaxis was quiet for a moment. "Now, I must return to my people and prepare for the assembly vote. But before I go, I have an offer for you." He turned to face her fully. "I want you to come with me. Not as a servant or an employee, but as an equal. I want you to be the first human liaison to the Dracovian Empire." Katie stared at him. "Me? But I am nobody. I have no training, no qualifications." "You have something more important," Vernaxis said. "You have compassion. You have courage. You have the ability to see beings as individuals rather than as members of a species. These are the qualities that my people need to learn, and you are the perfect teacher." It was an impossible offer. Katie had dreamed of working among the stars, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. To serve as a bridge between two civilizations, to help shape the future of humanity's relationship with one of the oldest species in the galaxy. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I accept," she said. 2 months later, Katie stood in the great hall of the Galactic Assembly, watching as history was made. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the massive chamber, their forms ranging from humanoid to truly alien. The air was thick with languages and customs that Katie was only beginning to understand. Vernaxis stood at the center of the hall, addressing the assembly in his role as chief diplomat. His voice carried through the chamber, strong and clear. "For many years, there has been debate about humanity's place among the stars," he said. "Some have argued that they are too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. But I have seen another side of humanity. I have seen their capacity for kindness, for sacrifice, for love. They've proven that strength without compassion is hollow, and that true honor lies in how we treat those who can do nothing for us." He turned and looked at Katie, who stood among the human delegation. "Humanity has earned their place among us," Vernaxis declared. "I call for the vote." The vote was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. Species after species cast their support for humanity, many of them swayed by Vernaxis's words and by the story of a simple woman who had helped a stranger. When the final count was announced, a cheer rose from the human delegation that echoed through the hall. Katie felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She had helped make this possible. Her small act of kindness had started a chain of events that brought humanity into the galactic community as equals. Later that night, after the celebrations had quieted, Katie stood at a window overlooking the stars. Vernaxis joined her, and they watched the cosmos together. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Katie asked softly. Vernaxis considered the question. "I think we made the only choice that mattered. The universe is vast and often cruel, but every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, sends ripples through the darkness. You sent those ripples, Katie Morgan, and today we all felt them." Katie smiled. The stars seemed brighter than before, closer somehow. Humanity had finally found its place among them, not through conquest or power, but through something far more simple and far more powerful, through the simple act of helping a stranger. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, other civilizations took note. The humans had arrived, and they had brought something rare and precious with them. They had brought hope,